Welcome back to our podcast series on Global Capability Centres, where we explore global business leadership and the critical role of GCCs in driving success across borders. I'm Chris Danks. Today we're honoured to have Arvind Chaturvedi, a former Managing Director and Senior Vice President with extensive leadership experience at global giants like CDK Global, AstraZeneca and Capita. Arvind has not only transformed organisations but also built high-performing teams across multiple geographies, including India, the US, the UK and Mexico. In today's podcast, we'll do a bit of a deep dive into the nuances of leadership within GCCs, how effective leadership drives success, enables innovation and builds world-class teams. Arvind, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Let's just kick off by hearing a little bit about your journey, particularly your experience around GCCs, Arvind.
Yeah, I think you summarized it well in any case, Chris, but just a few more facts around it. Firstly, who I am, well, I'm an IT engineer. Been around in the industry for over 3 decades, 34 years to be precise. And if you look at the career is sort of broken into 2 main parts. A lot of work on software products, and everything that you could do with software products I've done in my life. Essentially, you can conceptualize to commercialize to sell. And everything in the middle, product management, engineering, et cetera, all of that as well. So, it's been life about software products for a very long time. The other significant aspect of the career has been about transformations, and that's where GCCs come in. But I'll come back to that. Transformation again has been, product transformation, application transformation, IT transformation, organizational transformation, and that's where GCCs come in actually. So my GCC journey started with Capita in 2010. And that was quite interesting because, what Capita wanted to do was set up a center in India. They were clear on that they wanted it in India. I'm talking of the Capita Group PLC and their IT services company called Capita IT Services. And they wanted to set up this center here to actually streamline, standardize services and then, raise the customer experience through that essentially. And that was the whole intent. And we did that. That was fantastic. And, we delivered the outcomes that were set out there and moved on from there. The next one was AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca was a different story altogether. The IT was internal to the company, but they had outsourced almost all of it. And with the advent of the new CIO, he decided that we needed to bring it all in because we needed more control on it and make sure that we become useful for the business yet again. And that's what led to the GCCs as part of the larger transformation. Right? It was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar transformation program that had been put in place essentially, and GCCs were part of it. So I initially did India, and then I moved on to do Mexico as well. And the intent was very clear. We had to become the partner for innovating the business alongside the business. And for that, we had to win their trust back. Business had lost all trust in IT with the work that was happening through the outsourced partners. And that was the job, really. And frankly, it all turned out well as well without dwelling too much on it. Most recently, I took on CDK Global Incorporated, which is a software company based in the US, headquartered in the US. Their India entity. The job there was to actually make sure that this entity could be transformed into a proper product and technology, center, if you like, and use that to drive up time to market, product quality, the overall customer experience, and through the various ancillary services that were there in the center as well, essentially, and 6 years on, here I am essentially. So, but CDK Global was a great journey as well, and we achieved the things that we wanted to achieve. You would have seen a theme there, Chris, that came out, which was each of these companies were very different in what their businesses were, their context was, but when they started off on the GCC journey, and these things were not even called GCCs at the time that these people set them up. For instance, in Capita, we just called it the India operation. There was no real name for it as such, but they all came across very clearly looking to do something which was very, very strategic to the business, As it turns out, everything was about raising the customer experience, all three of them, quite frankly. But setting that purpose up front really meant a lot, because then that allowed the center and its leadership to focus on what the outcome was, and then single-mindedly try and deliver to that, essentially, which is so important. Nobody was beating around the bush, whether it was the MD of Capital IT Services or the CIO of AstraZeneca or the MD of CDK Global. They knew, or the CEO of CDK Global, my apologies. They all knew exactly what they wanted. They laid that out very clearly. It was all in agreement, and we moved forward on that. Where I am today, I'm currently in a non-exec role with an Indian startup as a member of the advisory board. That's what I'm doing at the moment, talking a lot of GCC as we go along. So that's me.
Yeah, really interesting background. Certainly really relevant to what we're going to talk about. When it comes to leadership, I mean, you just sort of touched on it there, all parties wanting the same thing, being very clear about the goals. But would you be able to kind of expand out on what defines effective leadership when, within a GCC setting?
I think GCCs are slightly different, or the leaders in GCC have to look at themselves slightly differently than other businesses or people in other business models, if you like. GCCs, in a way, are the center for making that change happen, as I was trying to bring forth in my introduction of what I have done in my life as well, essentially. And what that means is, leaders who need to be effective in the GCC context have to be very, very capable of navigating through the challenges and the intricacies of a global operation, essentially. That has to be central to their skills and strength, if you like. That's number one for me, really. How they orchestrate the whole global way of working, across functions, across locations, really defines the crux of whether they can achieve what needs to be achieved or not. So that's number one for me in many respects. It's also about, because these are becoming the centers for innovation and evolution of the business, essentially. A lot of technology expertise, and I don't mean that they need to know every technology under the sun, because there are so many technologies that come and go, and it's evolving very quickly as well. But they should have the ability to harness technology in the right manner to actually deliver the outcomes. So that's for me number two in many respects. Obviously, because of the cultural differences between where the GCCs are located vis-a-vis where the parent enterprise is headquartered, there's all this wonderful thing about cultural, connect and communication and collaboration and all of that needs to be at the forefront of the minds of these individuals. They have to be very emotionally intelligent people, quite frankly, GCC leaders. If they're not, then that itself gets in the way of, getting their job done. Last but not the least, they have to be driven by operational excellence and innovation. They're people who should be centered around that, quite frankly. So navigating global intricacies, harnessing technology, being culturally very, clever and centered around it, quite frankly, and their life should be about operational excellence and innovation. That's how I typically describe an effective GCC leader.
Okay, interesting, very good. Tell me a little bit about how do you balance the operational needs, which you just touched on there, with the more strategic goals within a GCC, and how that relates to the wider business?
Right. I think it seems like it is sort of there's a lot of synergy between the two. It could be tricky if they were really not synergistic in that respect. But actually, there's a lot of synergy between the two things that you called out, Chris. It's between driving the global outcome or the global strategy that's demanded, and the local operational excellence that you have to drive. Because frankly, one feeds off the other for most part. Yeah, but you can't take that for granted either. So your question is very, very pertinent from that perspective. We can very easily fall prey to the fact that, this will just take care of itself. No, it doesn't. You have to actually deliberately set it up as such. Some of the things that I talked about earlier, really makes a whole lot of difference. But I think the important thing is, how well are you connected with the hub? In every respect, in your thought, in your actions, in your workflow, operationally, yeah. In terms of a team connect, if you're not really, really, well networked and connected with your center, which is, with, the parent entity, if you like, then the chances are that you lose sight of what really is happening on the global stage and find yourself in complete misalignment, essentially. So that is something that you got to be adjusting your radar. I remember having told one of my, team members, these senior leaders on my team once that, they were feeling confident that they were well aware of the strategy. And I said, look, and I respect that and I love that about you, that you're, so focused on that. But, the missing piece for me, which I called out in that conversation, this going back a few years, was that while they thought that the business strategy was all in hand and they were well aligned with it, they had not spent time actually talking to the various functions that were coming into play in terms of delivering to that business strategy and what their operational strategies were essentially to deliver that. And GCCs are cross-functional units, quite frankly. So, and that's the beauty of a GCC. I mean, one of the things that you can really achieve well with a GCC is the fact that you can bring a lot of synergies between the various functions. Sometimes in the headquarter or in a global business, the way it's set up, these functions can be really distributed across locations and thereby really not be connected. GCC actually turns out to be a place where they all come under one roof, at least in theory, and thereby they can be, brought to bring a lot of synergies between them and make processes more seamless, etc. So the idea is that how connected you are with the center and everything that contributes to what the central strategy is. That for me is very, very important. And it's important for leaders to keep that in mind when they're trying to balance these two things out, which is the local operations with the global strategy, essentially. The other thing is that as you start working on all the various aspects of what you're meant to deliver from the GCCs, how well are you connected on data? How are you sharing the data? What's going across? What's the transparency? What are you receiving? What are you sending to the hub? How do they see how this unit is performing vis-a-vis what they would want it to, and how do you see what they want of you? How do you sort of translate that into data and put that across both ways bidirectionally, essentially. That's very, very important. So really it is about making sure that you're aligned, you're sharing information as you need to, keeping as transparent as possible. Of course, everything that you need to do with your workplace, you need to do that as well. So making sure that within the GCC itself, all the units are well in tune with each other. They're synced up nicely and they're working together in a well orchestrated manner. All of that is very important, obviously. But I'm almost not taking that for granted that most leaders would focus on that anyway, essentially. But I think it is the overall effectiveness and the balance that you talked about, Chris, between the operational local operation and the global strategy will come about by virtue of what you're sharing, how you're sharing, how much you're sharing, and what do you know vis-a-vis what does the headquarters know. Let me call that just to differentiate between the GCC and the hub, if you like. Make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does make sense. And I know that we've done some previous podcasts recently with Vinu Nair as well, who I know that you know. And but I'm curious on your take. One of the questions I asked him was, what are some of the challenges that you faced within a GCC? What have you had to overcome in order to implement GCCs effectively?
I think there are, you got to define it at three levels, according to me. One is number one, which most people think about as talent-related challenges when it comes to GCC. So that's one. Obviously, everything, regulatory. You got to make sure that you're setting it up right, et cetera, et cetera. I'll come back to the talent and talk a bit more about that because that's really, really important. And then, of course, it is also about whether you set it up for delivering what you need to deliver, which is, that continuous improvement, that innovation, et cetera, et cetera. Last but not the least, that really, the last bit that I talked about is directly linked to what I was talking of earlier, which is your strategic alignment.
Mm-hmm.
For in most cases, that is the thing that gets lost. And I thought your question was great there about the balance between the local operation and the global strategy, because I think it is the one thing that people miss out on. So coming back to talent and its retention, I think attraction of talent is what people mostly worry about. Will I be able to recruit the right people? Now, if you're in the right location, you know, right region of the world, right region of the country that you've chosen, you made those selections right, then chances are your talent pool is very rich anyway for delivering what you want to deliver. So attraction is not an issue in terms of availability of talent pool. Attraction is an issue in terms of how you position yourself as an employer to that talent pool. You know, are you seen as an attractive enough employer for them to come and look at you with interest and say, "I want to work for you"? Yeah, that's number one. So your focus has to be on how you're positioned in the eyes of the talent that you're looking to hire, quite frankly. And that would mean in terms of your, broadly speaking, people refer to it as employer branding. Yes, that's what it is. But it is about your culture, your values, your employer value proposition. All that has to come out very clearly. That's very, very important for attraction. Now you bring a person through the door, your next challenge starts the day they enter the door, which is how do you retain them? Because you're living in a competitive, environment. And GCCs in India especially, the biggest struggle they have is retaining great talent because there's so much competition. I mean, I was reading up some stats this morning, my morning, India morning, uh, and that was in relation to some work that I was doing with somebody else. And one of the things that came out very clearly was how much mobility there is in the talent, and even in cities like Bangalore, which you'd have heard of, Bangalore as you would know it, perhaps, rather than Bangalore. Um, Even in those cities, there's so much movement and exodus of the talent from the city. Although everybody knows that Bangalore is the Silicon City of India, right? So, but even Bangalore sees a lot of movement of talent. Yes, they are still net positive in terms of talent. Net positive meaning they retain more of their talent, locally bred talent than most other cities. But there is movement. It's not like they can consume 100% of the talent, or they end up consuming 100% of the talent, because the talent also wants to explore. The talent that's bred in Bangalore wants to explore, go to other cities, go to other countries, and see what they can do for themselves. So retention is a big thing, and I think for retention, you need to focus on things which are relevant to the individual. What's relevant to them is, what is your overall vision for the GCC? Today's talent is very keen on knowing that. Are you in for the long term? Are you in for something really exciting, really good? Or are you going to make me do some grunt work here? They're very clear on that. Nature of work and the long-term vision. Two things that are very, very important to them. Of course, the money counts, the benefits count, the work environment counts, all of that is important. But you give me all of that, I'm talking as a talent would be thinking in first person. Give a person everything that in that respect. You don't give them a vision of the GCC for the long term, and you don't give them good work to do, they'll still leave you. That's for sure. So talent retention. Of course, once you got that talent on board, you got to be, like I said, the other two or three things that are called out, right? You've taken care of the attraction, taken care of the retention. The other big thing is how do you actually make sure that you're maintaining that rhythm of continuous improvement and innovation while driving the operational needs of the deliverables that you have committed to, essentially, right? It is literally fixing the airplane mid-flight. That's what you're doing constantly, essentially. And you got to be focused on that. You got to be thinking about, you got to be challenging yourself and asking yourself, what am I not doing right? What are things that could have been done better? Is there anything else that I should be looking at that I'm not looking at? And that is one of the big challenges that you got to get over. You can very easily slip into a level of complacence, essentially, thinking everything is all right. And that's when everything starts going horribly wrong, to be honest. So that's the other challenge. And then of course all the tactical stuff around regulatory compliance. So you got to keep on top of it. Whether you're working within the financial policies of the mothership, whether you're working within the tax and financial constraints of the country that you're operating out of, and all of those things, which are very, very important. So I think there are, I wouldn't, they're all challenges, but really, not unsurmountable, according to me, Chris, as long as you keep them on your radar all the time.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, maybe you could expand a little bit more on the innovation side, Arvind. I know that historically India's always been known for for cost savings. People go there to for salary arbitration and those things. How do you sort of develop that culture of innovation whilst also, I think it's still true that companies not only move for the talent, there is still a cost element of it. How do you balance that and really drive innovation in a centre that, within India that's been set up?
While it might look like two different things, the cost efficiency and the innovation, actually the innovation drives more cost efficiency in any case, essentially. So the moment you start thinking of it in that respect, then you're not looking at two separate things that you're trying to handle. Yeah, you're actually doing one thing which is driving down your cost. You're optimizing on everything to actually make sure that you get the service or the product delivered at the best cost. And to achieve that, you have to innovate. Now innovation doesn't have to be rocket science. It shouldn't be like you launch something that went to Mars. No, that's not innovation. Innovation is every little thing that you do differently to make the process more efficient, more effective, more cost effective, and all of those things essentially constitutes innovation. Innovation can be incremental, innovation can be radical. Yeah. Now people generally think of radical innovation when they talk innovation, but for me, all the incremental innovation that you do along the way is equally important, if not more important, from the perspective of the effectiveness of the unit that you try to build. So you when you move anything across to a GCC, if you're just done a lift and shift in the first place, that's okay. Yeah. But the moment it's landed in the GCC, you got to be thinking about, is this the most streamlined and a standardized process that I'm running here? Essentially, you got to ask yourself that question. Start looking at that. That itself will take out a lot of waste and thereby cost. Essentially, okay. Then you start thinking of all because you're going into these countries, setting up GCCs where people are, the talent that you're hiring are really switched on from technology's perspective. They're actually technologists for most part, essentially. They're capable of reinventing some of those things by using technology effectively. Yeah, and some of the processes that you brought across. That again will drive down cost to a great extent. So so you streamline the process. You just applied some simple continuous improvement or lean principles to it, and you streamline the process, standardized it. You started applying technologies to it. You brought down cost again. Yeah. Again, you got to be very mindful as a leader. At least that's something that I keep telling leaders all the time. Are you going to buy or build a certain skill? There are so many skills you require these days in making these GCCs successful. You can't build everything under your roof, to be honest. So how are you setting up that partner network around yourself? There's the great thing about a country like India. I speak for India because I'm sitting here, but there's such a great ecosystem of services partners and startups and universities. Have you actually spent time and effort to actually set up a great ecosystem around yourself that you can feed off, where it requires specialist skills, so that you don't have to go and buy and build and expend a lot of money retaining those skills within your organization? You can just go and take it from a partner and leverage it as and when you need, essentially. So that really is the third level that I would think about when I'm thinking innovation. And overall, when you look at a talent, you got to be constantly asking yourself, is this a talent for now or talent for now and the future? How do I actually flex this? Is there fungibility here that I can build? Can I actually reskill, upskill some people, some part of my talent base, essentially, to make sure that it's ready for the future, so I'm not caught by surprise there and end up spending a lot of money buying stuff from outside. So that future planning, that strategic view of where things are heading, essentially, both locally and globally, is extremely important. Locally, you got to keep an eye that tomorrow the same talent might be available for a higher cost because of the competition out there. How do I actually make sure that I don't end up paying the extra dime on it, essentially? Yeah, you got to be thinking about that. So innovation. First of all, my summary of my answer to your question, Chris, is think innovation not as a radical change that you're trying to bring about. Think of innovation as those incremental changes that you're going to bring about to make sure that you make the whole outcome more effective, more cost efficient. You'll automatically start, delivering cost efficiencies anyway, essentially. Yeah. Make sense?
It really does. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The innovation really driving the operational efficiencies. So not being too focused on the operation itself, but actually focused on the innovation, which has that natural side effect of driving the operational efficiencies around it. So yes, it definitely does make sense. I wanted to come back as well to coming back to hiring again, but on a different track this time. So when it comes to leadership, what advice would you give to people? What thoughts do you have around how to identify, attract, retain leadership, and what kind of people do you need to go after when you're setting up a GCC, for example, when you need leaders to get the thing moving in the first place?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and I spoke about that in response to the first thing that you asked as to what constitutes effective leadership in GCC. So there might be some repetition there. Please bear with me. But I think the first thing I look for in leaders is people with great deep local insights, but a great global perspective attached to it. That's your GCC leader, quite frankly. You get people who are too internally focused only locally. They're not good enough. People who are just, looking outside, not knowing enough about what goes on in the country or the city that you're operating out of, can be, not very effective either. So you have to have that kind of talent in the leadership where they have this great insight of everything that's local that they need to know to be able to be an effective leader there in that city, that country that the GCC is established in, yet have a very good global perspective on how businesses run globally. What is the expectation of the customer or of the global customer, and how do you deliver to that, essentially, right? So that dual perspective is extremely important. I look for that very specifically when I'm hiring leaders for GCC, essentially. So that's number one. The other is this, what we talked about a few minutes back, as to how continuous improvement or innovation driven are they? Does it come naturally to them, or is it something that they'll have to force themselves to do? Do they think like that, or will they have to be made to think like that, essentially? And my natural choice would be people who think like that all the time, who are constantly challenging themselves and their teams to look at getting more efficient, more effective, etc. So that's the other big trait that I look for. Thirdly, it is always, a case of, and again, like I said, a bit of repetition there, so apologies, but unfortunately, that's what is important in this context, which is how culturally, developed they are, how they can go across diverse cultures, diverse locations, diverse geographies, deal with people effectively, deliver to them what they need to deliver, and get from those people, their colleagues sitting in different locations, get them from them what they need to get to them for themselves and for their teams to actually make themselves effective, essentially. How well connected can they get across cultures? That's very, very important, because that becomes a huge issue, if you like, if people are not driven, and that you need to be open-minded, you need to be ready to take some diverse perspectives, you need to be ready to be challenged. That's what cultural flexibility is about, right? You have to be adaptable. You'll get different points of views coming from different cultures, and I look for those traits. Last but not least, I certainly look for people who have enough understanding of technologies in them, essentially. Can they harness technologies to actually evolve what we do out of that GCC effectively or not? And not everything that they know might be relevant, and they might not know everything that's relevant from a technology perspective, because that space is so vast. So I don't look for everything in an individual, but given the context of what the GCC is about, that one is hiring those leaders for, you need to look for people who are switched on from that perspective. So that's my thing about identifying. And then, of course, you got to, again, once you've found the right leaders, you got to find ways of keeping them with you, right? So for the long term. And that generally comes from the nature of work that you're giving them, quite frankly. I mean, that is the most important thing. Am I actually doing something which is meaningful on the global stage? Yeah. Is it really impacting the customer of the enterprise and the market that the enterprise operates in directly? If the answer to those questions is yes, people usually stay. Again, the money, the learning and development, all of those are extras that you add on top of the work environment itself, the openness, the inclusive workplace that you can build, safe environment that you can build for them. All of that matters a lot. But I have found that the one thing that makes people stay or not is the nature of the work that they're doing, and how relevant it is in the context of the larger organization, essentially.
How would you flip it around the other way? Is there anything you'd add if you were a leader yourself? Is there any advice you would give to an aspiring leader of a GCC who's maybe not done it before?
I think it is really, if somebody is aspiring to be in a GCC, they really need to be thinking about how broad their thinking is. That's the first thing I would ask them to reflect on, essentially. And I truly mean thinking and not experience. They might have worked across various organizations, various kinds of businesses, various countries. Yeah, but has that developed their perspective to be as broad as it could be? Essentially, that's extremely important. And then really it is the other thing that I would ask of them is how do you think service delivery? Think about that, because and when I say service delivery, I mean product delivery or service delivery, whatever is getting delivered from the GCC, essentially, whatever you're responsible for. How do you think of that? I mean, one of the most important things that you need to have as a leader, that I thought I needed to build for myself when I was a leader coming of age, essentially, at that time, was how do I actually bring the talent, the technology, the service delivery, and that is the delivery management, I mean, so and the governance all together. How do I harmonize these things? How do I bring them together to actually make sure that we're delivering the best outcome that we can? We can't think of these things in isolation, and if you're not attuned to actually do that, think of these together in alignment, then that's something you need to fix as if you're aspiring to run GCCs, because frankly, that's the main job. That's the day job. The whole work management is about that. How do you bring that together? Thirdly, I've said people, I've come across great leaders, aspiring leaders. Where they fail is how well they communicate, essentially. Now, communication doesn't necessarily mean prowess on language. Yeah, it's important. But what are you communicating? When are you communicating? And then how are you communicating? All of those things matter, right, Chris? So the timing of your communication and the content of your communication is as important as how you communicate. Yeah, probably more important, according to me. And I think learning that as to what constitutes good communication, that's very, very important if you want to be a GCC leader. And especially if you're sitting remote, right? You're sitting thousands of miles away, tens of thousands of miles away from the center of the action, if you like, yeah, where the parent hub is, yeah. And there's lots of decisions happening there. There are lots of dynamics coming into play over there. You're obviously trying to keep your eye as best as you can on that. But leaders sitting in the center also are probably struggling with the same distance, being that far away from you. So how much visibility are you giving them, and how much visibility are you getting for yourself from there is going to be hugely important. And you've got to understand how you do that, really. Lastly, I keep telling people your greatest asset are your team. If you don't know how to be a team leader, then you probably can't be a GCC leader at all, essentially, is what I tell them. You need to be thinking about when you give a job to an individual, and this is not true only about GCCs, Chris. It is about any job, and you are an employer, you know this. So that speaking, from my experience, I believe a job should not be about the job. It should be about the career that you're offering to an individual, essentially. And as a leader, you got to be thinking about how will I convert this job opportunity that I put in front of this person, given to this person, into a career that they will cherish for a long time to come, essentially. And if the leader is not invested in that, chances are that they will not be able to retain the best team, especially in the GCC where the competition is rife. And we'll keep losing people and thereby, not be as effective as they could otherwise be, essentially. So, those are 3 or 4 things. And of course, I mean, I said this was the last thing, but not quite. The most important thing for me, be proactive about the outcomes that you're meant to do. Don't wait for somebody to come and tell you this is what we expect from you. Figure out what that is that, you need to deliver, your unit needs to deliver, and drive that outcome proactively. Don't wait to be told. Those are my 4 or 5 things really that I keep talking to aspiring leaders about.
Brilliant. No, great insights on that. And tell us a little bit about your vision of the future of GCCs. I always find this the most fascinating part of these podcasts. So everyone has a different take on it. But how do you see things developing? We've obviously gone through a few iterations of offshoring, I guess different types of offshoring and so on. In the past, largely driven by cost. Now it's driven by other business priorities and other reasons around talent and other things. How do you see it going forward? Like, what does the future look like for GCCs?
I think, and now I speak a lot more from the India perspective, Chris. So please bear with me, because India, I suppose, has the most evolved ecosystem as far as GCCs go, essentially. And no disrespect to any other location. I've worked in other locations as well. My heart goes to all my teams out there as well. But I think the evolution of the GCC phenomenon has happened the most in this country, to be honest. In India. So if I look at it from the India lens, especially, really GCCs, where they're heading is they will certainly start sort of driving growth of organizations in the future if they are set up right, and if the leadership is the right leadership for that GCC. Essentially, they will really become instrumental in driving the growth of the organizations that they belong to. To be honest, they were the where it all started, like you said, Chris, in a question itself. Where it all started with, they were certainly just doing the process, the tasks, if you like, the back end tasks to start with. Give it another 10 years, if things go well and if leaders develop themselves as they should and organizations look at GCC in the right light, then they have the ability to becoming the driving force behind the organization, quite frankly, in terms of their growth. Using GCCs for growth is what I keep talking to people about more often than not, quite frankly, because they can really give you a great competitive advantage. If you want to add a line of business, for instance, think about how you can incubate it in a GCC and then roll it out wherever you want to, essentially, across the globe. Those are opportunities that will come by. Clearly, because of the level of talent that the GCC ecosystem attracts, essentially, and great talent at that. Where we had knowledgeable people in terms of process turning into innovators are now, in my view, ready to get converted into reinventors of business, if you like. Like I said in response to your question about balancing innovation with operational needs, right? People ought to be thinking about how do we actually do this differently, using technology, using different skills to make this more and more efficient and effective, whatever we're doing, whatever that process is, essentially. And earlier, when we used to look for people in the GCC, we used to look for people who knew the process. Say if you're doing setting up a service for order to cash, for instance, you look for people who knew the process of order to cash and some parts of it, so they could specialize in those specific areas of the entire process and come and do that for you. Now you're looking for people who actually would come and obviously know what that part of the process, how that part of the process works, but what technology can you deploy against it to actually make sure it becomes more efficient, easier for your customer, easier for yourself internally. So reinvention is where I think GCs are going. I think, again, stats that I picked up recently in some other context, essentially, more and more global leadership will come out of GCCs as well. And in the Indian context, again, those stats that I was looking at was up until last year, I think there were about 5,000 leaders in GCCs identified as global leaders, who were actually leading on the global front, essentially. The forecast from various gurus of the industry are that it'll go up to 5 times of that. The 5,000 will turn into 25,000 by the time we get into the 2030s, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So more and more global leadership will be drawn from there. Also, I think, again, coming back to India, because of the Indian educational ecosystem developing the way it is, if we're churning out almost 50% women in STEM annually, essentially, right? Which means the women in global leadership will grow as well. Women in leadership in the first place in GCCs will grow, and women in global leadership will grow as well. So my 4 things, really, as far as the future of GCC is concerned, drivers of the growth of the businesses that they represent, really the hub for reinvention of the businesses, essentially, more and more global leadership coming out of this incubator called the GCC, and more women in leadership is what I see as the future of GCCs, quite frankly.
Fascinating, particularly your point around 50% of women in the STEM field. That's something I didn't know, and I think be interested to see just how the whole trend develops over the next few years. I think from what I'm listening to, and has also come up in from previous speakers as well, has been around the fact that they're becoming nerve centers, becoming the leader of the organization almost in some senses, which is obviously a very big shift compared to the previous evolutions of GCCs in India. Very interesting. We're coming up towards time now. Just to start wrapping up, is there one piece of advice that you would give organisations scaling up in India? Just to sum up your thoughts, really, Arvind.
Yeah, I think you asked for one, I'll give it 2, Chris. Sorry. One is, I think it's very important people realize as they start thinking of GCs that the most important thing, what I said, pointed out in my introduction itself up front when you asked me that question, asked me to introduce myself. The most important thing that you must do before you start thinking about setting up a GCC is think about what the long-term vision is for that GCC. What are you building it for? It's not that you cannot adapt along the way. It's not that you cannot shift along the way. Of course you can. You can keep tweaking it and changing it, and all of those things are possible. But unless at the point of design of that unit you've not thought about what you really want out of it, chances are that you'll not be able to deliver it in the end. Okay, so that's number one. Be clear at the concept stage what you're wanting out of this unit, essentially, and then you can build it in phases. You don't have to go the whole 9 yards at once. No, that's not what one is saying. But think about what that long-term vision is. That's number one. Number two, if you really want to leverage these units, empower its leadership, empower its people, essentially. That is extremely important. I mean, the more autonomy, the more decision-making rights you devolve to your GCC, the more you'll get out of those. So those are my 2 pieces of advice to organizations looking to do GCCs.
Brilliant. Yeah. So empower the GCC is what you're saying, basically, to help steer the ship. Very interesting. Great. That's been great, Arvind. There's some really, you've really offered us some great insights. I hope everyone watching has enjoyed this. I know we have upcoming podcasts together as well, so looking forward to expanding out on this subject. Thanks very much for spending your time doing this, and I'm sure it'll be very valuable to many people watching. So thank you.
Thank you for having me yet again, and it was a pleasure being here. Lovely conversation. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network to help others in your field. You can also find Arvind's LinkedIn profile in the show notes if you want to connect or learn more about Arvind's journey around GCCs. Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next episode where we're going to talk further about GCCs in different ways, different contexts, and hopefully there'll be more to learn on the next episode.